Well, the biggest story of the day, the government of India said that it has taken note of the statement by US President Donald Trump on bilateral trade. The government said it is studying its implication and reiterated that it is committed to the objective of protecting and promoting the welfare of farmers, entrepreneurs and MSMEs, where US President Donald Trump has announced 25% tariff on goods imported from India effective August 1st, along with an additional penalty for India's purchase of Russian energy and military equipment. But while responding to reporters, he said that the negotiations are still on. Trump also criticized India's trade with Russia, particularly amidst the global calls to end the conflict in Ukraine. And this decision comes as trade talks between the US and India remains unsolved. With sticking points around the agriculture and dairy sectors as well, Indian officials suggest that the tariffs may be temporary as negotiations continue, with the US delegation expected in Delhi by late August. So that's the latest that we are getting to understand on the Trump tariff announcement of 25% on Indian markets. But let's try to understand more of that in detail. And let me welcome Atman Trivedi, who's the former senior advisor in US Commerce and State Departments. Very good morning and thank you so much for your time. And firstly, your take on this 25% tariff announcement on India, because of late we were just hearing that the negotiations are still underway and maybe in August we can definitely reach a trade deal where even Donald Trump was quite positive that a trade deal with India could be through. So from 26%, just a 1% of a decline at that 25 number is that what we are getting to understand. What do you make out of it, and is that a surprise for India too?
Thanks for having me. I think it's a bit of a surprise, but we shouldn't make too much of this announcement. There's a temptation to overreact to the U.S. announcement of the 25% tariff, but this could be temporary. We've seen that tariff letters have been introduced on other countries. A tariff was introduced on Indonesia, for example, through a tariff letter that the president sent out. And then within a couple of days, the tariffs were revoked and there was a trade deal that was announced with that country. So this could be a temporary one-off development, and we shouldn't read too much into it.
Mr. Trivedi, thanks for that take coming in. Not much of a surprise coming in on the number, but Mr. Trivedi, what's really caught us by surprise is the extra element that has been added to this entire tariff imposition, and that's the penalty, because India has been buying Russian oil and Russian military equipment as well. What do you think we should be reading into when it comes to this penalty amount? How big of an amount could that be, and could that cause any significant impact to the India-US bilateral trade relations?
No, it's a good question. I think that element of the announcement was also surprising. Not many of us anticipated it. It's, any view on it is going to be speculative, but it's entirely possible that the administration views this as a negotiating tactic, a way to gather more leverage, even as the talks continue. The president, as you noted earlier in your segment, said that negotiations are happening. I think this is all part of the deal. And rather than be provoked or react kind of reflexively, it just has to be considered as part of the negotiation.
All right, but Mr. Trivedi, the other fact of the matter is that the US and India trade number, if we see, that's not that big. And along with that, India remains to be domestically focused economy. While there were talks and US wanted India to open their doors for the agricultural sector as well, while we refrained, what do you believe could be the first line of defense for the Indian government as of now?
I think both sides are trying to identify their sources of leverage, sources of defense. India, as the government announced today, is intent on protecting its farmers, taking care of MSMEs and other small entrepreneurs. and that's understandable. The U.S. also has segments of its market that it wishes to protect. But both sides, I think, are hard at work and are negotiating in good faith and in trying to find that common ground. And identifying areas of commonality to do something ambitious and unprecedented. I think that's what makes these talks so difficult. What they're trying to do is historic on the trade front. We haven't had this kind of trade opening take place between the U.S. and India before, and it was always going to be difficult. And I think we're seeing that right now.
Right, Mr. Trivedi, and also, like Trump himself has mentioned yesterday, that they are going to be giving us a better number, or rather a final number. We should have more clarity towards the end of the week. So, of course, this may or may not be the final number. But despite these statements coming in, do you expect the market to have a knee-jerk reaction today?
Yeah, a knee-jerk reaction, but I think at least, in the U.S., our markets in New York have kind of priced in a little bit of volatility, a bit of uncertainty. But there's a sense now, at least in U.S. markets, that this president has a unique negotiating style. But ultimately, he views tariffs and some of the threats that are made along those lines all as part of the negotiation. And the goal is to get to a deal. And, with that understanding, I think the markets here have started to smooth out as they develop a greater understanding of just how this administration negotiates on trade.
But Mr. Trivedi, the other fact of the matter is, if we look at some of the other recent deals, there were some concessions indeed. Look at what happened to the latest one, South Korea, 15% tariff implication versus 25% earlier. And we look at some of the other economies, wherein like Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, the tariff number stands to be a little below versus what we are getting to understand for India. And along with that, Mr. Trivedi, the other fact is that when negotiations were on between US and China, China definitely refused to go down to US trade terms. Do you believe that as of now, since India remains to be one of the fastest growing economy, we stand a very strong chance to negotiate on our terms?
Well, I think the sides will ultimately end up with a deal. I'm optimistic on that front. And I think there'll be a deal there where both sides are able to say, hey, there are a number of wins that we were able to achieve and our friends in India were able to achieve and vice versa. I think that the 25%, again, it's just an initial going in number. And, the tariffs will go into effect at that rate on Friday. But would it stun me if a day from now we learn that the sides have reached an agreement? It would be surprising, but you couldn't rule out that possibility. What I'm saying is that 25% is just quite possibly a temporary number. And there may be able to be an agreement, that lands somewhere between 15 to 20%. We've seen Indonesia and Vietnam come in around 19%, 20%. Something like that seems entirely possible to me.
Very great to have your thoughts this morning on the show. Thanks so much for taking the time out and speaking to us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Well, on that note,